at that point if your kidneys aren't already healthy, right? So a lot of that stuff that you hear about is situations like that. But when you're looking at a healthy individual, I haven't really seen any science that said, hey, this is harmful or damaging. All the science says there was no adverse events. Everyone was healthy at the beginning. Everyone was healthy at the end. These are the results they got, and so forth. In relation to kids, and I'm saying meaning kids under 18 is what, youth, however you want to name them. I don't think there's really a place for creatine in their nutrition programs, right? And the reason I say that is because we go back to the puberty stage. If you don't have the testosterone and other hormones that you need to be able to hold that muscle, maintain that muscle, build that muscle, tendon strength, all that stuff, then you don't need to be taking something that might artificially accelerate that. And think of this as a good analogy would be a steroid, right? Steroids in an adult make muscles much stronger than they probably were meant to ever be. Well, if you're not done right, if you don't really monitor it or take some bad steroids, all this type of stuff, your tendons get stressed. They can break. There's a lot of side effects, right? Not to mention, obviously, hearts and, things like that. But just from a structural standpoint, you reach a point where physically your body can't maintain that strength or that force that you're putting on it. And I look at creatine as, and this is more of my, what I would call expert opinion. I don't know that I've seen a study, because to try to do a study with youth and kids under 18s, most likely the research board's never going to approve that, right? Especially if it's going to harm children. So, or potentially have an adverse event on children. So I don't know that there's ever a study that's truly been done on that, but because of those reasons. But my opinion would be, you are now trying to accelerate the force on those muscles greater than what the body might be able to maintain or support. And that's why I would say creatine does not have a place in growing young athletes, because their bodies are still maturing. Like, bones haven't hardened yet. Tendons are still developing. Right. Growth plates are still moving, right? Like, you're putting a lot of extra stress and force on movable parts of your body that could cause detrimental damage later in life when you're an adult. And so, not to mention that if you don't have the, maturity level from a hormone standpoint and whatnot, does creatine even work at all in a young athlete? Again, it's, right. There's very limited research on that type of stuff, because when it comes to anyone under 18 and you want to do a research study, they are very, very, very specific and particular in protecting that underage individual, right? So if there's adverse things that might happen, the review board is probably not going to allow you to do that study. So, right.
And then my next question, would love to hear your thoughts. Probably the third most popular question I get, at least with regards to supplementation, is what about pre-workouts? There's been, you and I talked about it before, but, they're obviously incredibly popular now. Supplement stores, internet, everything is pushing it really, really hard in terms of, the latest and greatest YouTube stars are using them. What are your thoughts? Because I honestly probably see, pre-workout, in the weight room more than I see water in the weight room, unfortunately. So maybe you'll give us your 2 cents on that from a scientific background and maybe your perspective in general on them.
Yeah. So, it is all the hype, because obviously young athletes read magazines. They look up to athletes, idols, things like that, right? So if they're taking it, it's got to work, right? It's got to be great. What they don't know is that athlete's probably getting paid to drink that after every game or whatever, right? How many times do you see someone grab a Monster Energy drink, right? Because they're getting paid. Or put the hat on, right? Because they're getting paid.
Right.
So they very well may even just be letting it touch their lips and they're not even swallowing it, right? And then it gets set down and
Right.
drank. So again, that's where some education and some, light bulb moments of teaching these kids some of the truth behind some of these endorsements, right? And how things play out. But there's not a lot of science to the pre-workout phenomenon right now. Partly because it's new, and partly because there's studies that say it wasn't effective. It wasn't, beneficial. You do have to be careful with what people are doing because, if you look at one ingredient and you say, all right, if they take this, in theory, it gets this result. And no high blood pressure or no irregular heartbeat or fast heartbeat, right? But then you take this other ingredient and say, all right, the same thing. In theory, it does this. It didn't cause any adverse effects to the heart or blood pressure. Now add them together. What happens? Unless you do a study on those combined ingredients together, it can sometimes be a little difficult. I mean, there's some science that kind of can indicate if things are at risk or not at risk. But, that's why a lot of these ingredients individually are trademarked and things like that because they've done those studies. They've tested it against other stuff to make sure that when you combine things, that you still have the desired effect that you want and that you don't have a high blood pressure response or an accelerated heart rate response. With most of the pre-workouts, it's like a caffeine spike. I mean, that's all it really is it's amping up your metabolism and your energy level so that you can, in theory, work harder, work faster, do more volume, lift more weight, in the same amount of time. That's the idea of the pre-workout. And then the theory would be that in the backside, you get more muscle growth, you get muscle strength as a result of it. But there's really no science that shows that any of them have been shown to be really beneficial. And depending on which ingredients you take or how much you take, because sometimes it's not even the ingredients, it's the quantity. These supplements are designed for usually an adult human body, right? An adult weight, not a youth that's maybe half the body weight or half the size, but they're taking what I would call an adult dose. So right. There's just too many unknowns with the pre-workout stuff that, and then what we do know up to this point is that the science isn't real supportive of them, that showing that, hey, these do work. So again, as science evolves and maybe some of these manufacturers or formulators get better at putting certain ingredients together, they may stumble across something. But again, that's what science is for, right? That's where these studies come into play. But that could be 10 years from now, could be never, could be right. 6 months from now. We don't know. So right. That's why we always refer back to science and just seeing what are we seeing for data right now? Has it changed? Is it still the same? Any new discoveries? But for this one, it's more hype. But pretty much it's all hype than science at the moment.
Save your money.
Yes. For that one. Yes.
Right. So, if they're saving their money and, putting it in places that it adds value, and we talked a lot about your thoughts on, supplementation in general, which really is foundational nutrition. What types of supplements should, let's say, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds in particular, and obviously it may trickle down a little bit towards more middle school age-based kids, but what types of supplements should they be looking at? Should they have a hole in their diet? We talked some about protein and perhaps how that fits in. You touched a little bit on the multivitamin. Maybe you'll go back and touch a little bit on that. And, what about things like omega-3s and fatty acids? Is that something kids should look at? Is it safe? Is it worthwhile? Or anything else you see? One thing, and then I'll let you answer, is it seems like, every other week in health, nutrition, fitness, there's the latest and greatest supplement. Hey, take this and you're going to burn fat 100 times faster. This supplement now shows that it's going to do whatever it may be, X. And every other week, it's like, the next thing that we're on to. So something that's tried and true that again really supports function as a,